Fratelli, socio de Hogan Lovells.
Today, I have the honor and the privilege of presenting Miguel Zaldivar, who's Venezuelan by birth, of Cuban parents. He was educated in Venezuela. In the 90s, he migrated to the United States, where he studied law and joined Steele, Hector and Davis as head of the Latin American practice area. In 2002, Miguel joined the firm Hogan and Hartson firm, where he also created the Latin American practice, and he put it in the windows. He put Latin America in the windows. In 2010, Hogan and Hartson joined Lovells, being a merger between a North American company and an English company, creating Hogan Lovells. And that is when Miguel was appointed head of the infrastructure and projects area, which he was in charge of until 2018, when he was appointed member of the executive committee of the firm and administrators of the Asia Pacific offices. So he did a wonderful job. And this year, in 2020, he was appointed CEO of Hogan Lovells. And we're very proud about it, because he's the first Hispanic to occupy such an important position within the first 50 firms in the United States. So, without further ado, I'll give the floor to Miguel, and I'm sure that you're going to enjoy his talk. Welcome, Miguel. Thank you, Ricardo. Well, we didn't want you to get... it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you. You and I have been friends for many, many years. Not only you and I, but our families too. Your father, who was the lawyer and partner of my father. So there's been a long relation. I wanted to summarize what Bruno said and congratulate you for being appointed CEO of Hogan Lovells since 2020, a company that works with infrastructure, among other topics. And I wanted to give a summary of what Hogan Lovells is. It was created after the merger between Hogan and Hartson and the European company Lovells, with 2,400 attorneys with offices in Europe, America, and Asia, and one of the largest firms in the world. So welcome, Miguel. So I just wanted to greet the participants of this event. As Enrique said, we have a long-standing relation. We've worked together for many years, and we've had the privilege of practicing law together. My father worked in McKinsey for 37 years. Yes, in Venezuela, certainly. So there we met Ricardo at the time, because McKinsey was the attorney's firm that represented Ricardo's family's interests, very successful. And now my daughter is following our steps, and those of my father, working in New York. And Ricardo very kindly, when I was deciding whether to live in Washington or in New York, well, I tried to convince you, but at the end, you chose Washington. Yes, but really, it's a great pleasure. And as a friend, let me tell you that I'm very proud. I never imagined that I would be interviewing you as CEO of one of the most important firms in the world. The two of us come from the attorneys world in Venezuela. And I'm working with a CEO of an American company and you of another. But I think it's a good example of those things that life brings about, and one has to adapt. So that's a good lesson for the young lawyers. We, well, in and now in this pandemic that is an event unique in its kind in 100 years. And you became CEO in the midst of the pandemic. Let me tell you what the process was like, the adaptation process, not just adapting. Well, you continue to be a partner. And now, in addition to that, you are the CEO. What was the process like? Well, let me tell you very frankly, I continue to be a partner. I love law, and whenever I can, I try to go back to my hat as a lawyer and to work with my clients. But it's difficult because society is my main partner. I have to manage a global business of 2,500 lawyers. I was elected in November last year. Nobody was had even heard of COVID-19, and the idea was that in June this year I would assume with plans to continue to grow and to consolidate our share in the global market. But it all changed in March. I was living in Hong Kong at the time. I had been in China in January, but in February already we started seeing some cases in Hong Kong. And I was even asked by some members of the board, the previous CEO, he asked me whether I wanted to take over in June, because he said we have the possibility of putting it off because of this very atypical situation. And I said that it didn't have to. My life was marked by a crisis. My parents had to leave Cuba and they had to start from scratch in Venezuela, where fortunately we were received very kindly. I was born there, and my father could study in the evenings and study. And I did my postgraduate course, and I decided to go back and I worked in Illinois and then in Washington, and I had I spent as an in Steel Hector, a firm in Miami, highly prestigious. Now, unfortunately, there's not much left of Steel Hector. It joined Squire. So in the 90s, I was working with my father in Beckham Mackenzie, and I decided that I was going to do my own work. So my wife and I came to the United States, and we studied. We had our 2 children, and we had to start from scratch too, with a new language, something similar to what you experienced in Washington. It's easily said, but it's hard. You have to work a bit harder than the rest, and you have to overcome some barriers. As you, a partner of Iden Fox, nobody gave us anything as a gift. We needed to work and the creativity, and we had to adapt to the codes of conduct of the United States. I experienced that as a crisis, having to start from scratch, coming from the comfort of Venezuela, although it's true that we worked very hard. But my Mackenzie in Caracas had worked for 40 years. It was a wonderful brand. It was a leading company. There was no need for me to move from there, but I was ready to accept a new challenge. So that's why I came to the States. Once we graduated and everything was going fine, very shortly after, we switched to Hogan because it had a much stronger platform, and the work that we were doing at the time with energy for PDVSA and other companies, it needed the support of a global firm, and we were hit by September 11 and the crisis in September 11. I didn't mention the dot-coms crisis and then the 2001 crisis with the World Trade Center. And it was very sad to see what happened in Venezuela, where our main customers, all the contacts that we had cultivated were lost. And then we raised again to face the financial crisis in late 2008. And there we were left with no funds for projects in Latin America, and I had to work in China. So I told the CEO, if June the 1st is the date, I'll take over on June the 1st. So all this prepared you so that when the pandemic came, you could accept life as a crisis or as unforeseen events that would not stop you. Because I think that your attitude is that you'll have to face crisis both professionally and personally. And I think that we were all hit by, yes, well, Latin Americans are prepared to cope with crisis because that's the way the region works. It's a successful region, but we need to be able to adapt. First of all, we are not afraid. I was telling, I was asked, what is your role? What do you do? Well, make decisions and make timely decisions with no fear, because you know when to make a decision and how to make a decision. I think that we as Latin Americans, we are ready to make those decisions because we've gone through a lot in our countries and we've seen how we can beat any crisis. A CEO is a person that needs to develop the vision of the firm. You need to be a communicator. You need to be inspiring to people. And I think that it's no longer the time of dictators. And if you maintain that style, what happens is that the market will steal away the good lawyers. You have to be very transparent and you need to be able to react when circumstances change. So that's more or less our work as a CEO. It's not an easy thing. Of course, we are speaking of a firm with many lawyers that operates in many continents. In my case, obviously, it's easier because our offices are all in the United States, and in a way, our crisis goes hand in hand with the American market, and we can adapt. But in your case, you need to be able to survive in different continents. And of course, you're in a unique situation because, as I said earlier, you started your practice in Latin America, but then you moved to the United States, and then you also started working in Asia. How did that exposure prepare you, not just vis-a-vis different cultures, but for a global situation or a global crisis like this one? I think that each region must have its own peculiarities. Yes, I think that the essential thing is that you need to understand, it's just what you said. One solution, one way of doing things, it doesn't fit all the regions. You need to understand the realities. My experience in Asia helped me because at the time I was in charge of 14 offices and I was practicing actively. So we had things in Qatar, in the Emirates, and Riyadh. So I started to understand the Middle East, which is a different reality. I had to do a great job in Singapore and then in Thailand. I restructured the offices in Indonesia and I spent quite a while in Vietnam. So I'm familiar with the Southeastern Asia, not just the culture, but also the future opportunities and challenges. I spent about 8 years before moving to Hong Kong, commuting between Latin America and China. And most of my time, 2010 to 2018, working in Beijing offices. And I spent more time in Beijing than in Miami, New York, or Washington. And understanding the way the Chinese think is very useful. And I closed two operations with Mitsubishi, one, and the other very oriented to the PI, to the IP, and that was very enriching. Being born in Latin America, the child of refugees, and then moving to the United States, I became an American citizen too. So I learned the Anglo-Saxon culture, and I also spent some time in London. My wife is Italian. My in-laws are in Italy. Very good connection with the people in Madrid. So all that sort of prepares you to understand the different realities and how, very simply, you can Americanize the process. Not just decision making, but the recipe that we are going to use in each market. That's very interesting too. I think that you are the first CEO and the first non-American CEO. I think that is a recognition to your work. I understand that the firm is basically American and European. It's a merger. So it's a recognition by the firm, not only you as a leader, but as a global firm. It's not the American market alone or the European market alone, but it's global, right? Well, the way the merging between Logan, Hudson, and Lovells, those that designed that merging had a privileged mind because they chose two firms with a very similar culture. Today, nobody says, I come from this or I come from this other company. In the last 11 years, we have also recruited at all levels people that started in Hogan Lovells. And so we obtained a global company. We have 1,000 attorneys in the United States, but 1,500 elsewhere in the world. So we are integrated. It's not that we are different financial centers. Here, all the incentives are to promote teamwork. And what you said is right. In over 100 years in the United States, Hogan had always been American, and in the British side, the Lovell always was also their CEO was always British, so they appointed people with an impeccable background, and they followed the culture of the offices where they had grown. And our board decided not just to move in the field of diversity and to elect somebody who's a migrant and Latin, he's Hispanic, that is atypical, but a person that decided that I wasn't going to live in Washington or London, I was going to live in New York.
Donde más ejercí dentro de todos los estados de Estados Unidos. Y segundo, porque ese es el centro financiero para mí mundial y es un área donde Hogan Lovells debería de seguir creciendo aún más. Entonces, con una persona que no es anglosajona, no reúne los requisitos o perfil que por 100 años caracterizó esta firma. Y segundo, decide reconocer que esto es una firma realmente global y por ende los headquarters no están ni en Londres ni en Washington. Los headquarters están alrededor del mundo.
The firm became fully global, and the CEO is located in that area. Yes, we have observed a trend towards in that respect, and we have prepared some questions. We'll go to the questions a little bit later. But before that, I'd like to ask you one question. Where do you see the trend is going? Do you see that there are the trend is going towards global firms, especially global firms have merged with other American or European firms. We have seen in Latin America that some global firms have started to merge with Latin American firms. Do you see a certain trend? Do you see a finite market? This is a great question. And there are different visions about this. I'm one of those who believes that we are moving towards globalization of the profession and that we will continue to move forward in that respect. I think that many clients are right now making alliances with different service providers, and among those service providers are us, lawyers. So if you see our top 50 client list, you will see that those are the ones that supported us during COVID. We were not able to reach and go to the market to meet potential markets to try to increase our portfolio. We had to work with the clients we had. And those clients trusted us in different areas, in different markets, and we negotiate rates and contracts and some transactions or trials with them for a long term. So I think that right now we're following the trend of having global clients that require uniform quality, and we would like to make sure that we can keep quality with all of our clients. Of course, this is not the only choice, but if you see the big four, Deloitte and the biggest companies, you will see that they are also in legal in legal services. They are also targeting these types of clients, that is to consolidate groups of lawyers that are heavily competing with law firms. And in some markets, you see some law firms that are excellent, that have decided to contribute to the excellence of their markets. They contribute with great talent, and they have been able to make alliances with other freelance firms, or at least independent firms, not with the main chains, and they are holding a specific market position in Latin America and in Europe, and they are becoming dominant in their own countries, and they have made sure that they will this way continue to receive work from companies that or firms that don't have a global presence. And this economic model will continue to exist. So where is our profession going? On one hand, you have global firms. On the other hand, you have CPAs or service providers. And on the other hand, you have local firms using referrals and specific alliances, and then you have small or boutique firms that offer very specific and customized service at attractive prices, and this option will also remain. What is the future trend? I can't really tell you. I think that all will remain. The IP, especially boutique firms, will continue. They are keeping a significant share of the market. And companies like us, we had to adapt not to be displaced by those boutique firms. Yeah, what you're saying is interesting, because I think that you cannot compete in every possible front. There are areas where you can't really focus on. For example, you have to choose whether you will concentrate on branding or small firms or main companies. So that is within the same ecosystem, you will realize that there are restrictions. This is what I have seen in the general business IP practices. These practices have different realities. And sometimes you see that due to these different markets, you can't really charge the same depending of the markets, and the different markets don't enable you to compete in the different markets, basically because some of them are regulated in terms of taxes, for example. Exactly. So there are some competitors that are low cost competitors, for example, from Manila. We have a low cost center in Alicante. There we have a significant brand portfolio, um, and we have there a significant price competitive advantage. And we can offer that because there are lower wages in the area and lower taxes. And something that we're also doing is investing on technology. Our IP group has developed the total brand care product. They have created an automated product to automize the brand. They use AI to be able to use technology to remain competitive in that sector. There are sectors in which we don't feel that pressure in what has to do with the fees. For example, this is the area of patents. Outside IP, there are areas that still remain competitive, such as mergers and acquisitions. Yeah, mergers and acquisitions, M&As. We have had the strategy of working as a global firm, also in the area of litigation or international arbitration. For example, Uber, one of our main clients in the United States, we carry out mergers and acquisitions for them. They had significant problems to operate in London. So they decided to go, instead of going with one of the main local brands, they decided to go with an international brand. And we offered the regulatory support so that they could do that, so that they could obtain the license to provide their services. So this is the area where global clients want global firms to continue to operate. Yeah, that's really interesting. What we have seen is that there is a flatness in what has to do with demand. That is, if you have a flat demand in some legal services and you can't somehow increase awareness, at least you can lower your margin, so you can provide a more competitive price. I think that the idea here would be to be as efficient as possible, even if the market is flat, especially, for example, in labor issues. In some cases, you can decrease the price of your fees somehow. Of course, this in the long term is not the way to lower fees, and especially to lower wages, or the cost of human resources is not a strategy. But in the midterm, it definitely, the key profit cannot be to cut expenses, especially on fees, but to increase revenue. So the idea is to be more competitive in areas such as IP, of course, and in one of the main lessons of COVID was how to be more organized regarding expenses. We had our previous conversation. What did you do as a CEO during COVID? One of the things that I asked from the previous CEO is that he was the leader. He was managing overhead, but I asked him to make decisions and to make joint decisions from me and our vice CEO. So what we did was to try to cut expenses so that before uncertainty, we could keep the business operational, because really at that time nobody knew about the magnitude of this pandemic. So what we did was we set up austerity measures in areas of compensation for equity partners. We changed the income allocation strategy. We decreased some of the percentages. I imagine that must have been a very fun discussion, certainly, because what we needed at that time were resources. So we sat and we negotiated with the banks very quickly. We didn't know how much banks were going to be affected. So fully transparent, we withdrew all the money we could. We borrowed as much as we could in order to avoid the set off and have enough resources so as to meet our needs for at least 6 months. So you didn't know what was going to happen in terms of work or in terms of markets or anything. Yeah. As of July 31st, when I saw that the top 50 clients were not offering much work and demand had fallen, I decided to prepay the debt and to start the business without debt. Everybody was shocked. That was my first announcement in August. I said I'm going to pay off the debt, and that's what we did. But in March, we borrowed more money than we had ever done before. Yeah, the same happened to us. We didn't know what was going to happen. Our first trend was to make adjustments or cuts in the general market, especially for some underperforming resources. And we assumed that this was going to take 8 to 10 months. And now I think that in the end, 2020, in business terms, we're not talking about the economic or political areas here. The conclusion would be that 2020 was not as bad or disastrous as we thought originally. Well, for lawyers, yes. For others, yeah, of course. If we speak of this sector only, then of course there will be winners and losers. The winners will be global diversified firms, those who have diversified, that have a steady portfolio of clients, and that not only have geographical diversity but practice diversity. I think that those would be the ones that could survive. But especially those who have the courage to act quickly, to be agile, not only cutting costs in terms of wages, but also cutting other costs. We cut a lot of costs that I think we will never restore again. So this diversified global practice with loyal customers will in the end win. Will not be a bad year. We're still 3 weeks away from the closure, the financial closure. So I I think that it could be even the best year of the firm's history. Um, even it's really incredible, because if you consider this, the negative forecasts that we had at the beginning of the year, and if you see the situation now, and if you see the collection of the firm throughout this year, um, and if we continue to keep demand levels as the ones we had in the last 3 months, and if you consider also the competitive advantage that we have gained from global clients, and the cuts that we've made in traveling expenses, consulting expenses, non-essential expenses, we even could restructure some costs permanently and decrease the number of staff. So I think that we could even report profits over 2 digits. And as you said, firms made adjustments, and then they adjusted basically expenses in staff or other expenses, traveling expenses. So of course, somehow the revenues increase basically due to the adjustments. That's the advantage of having a general firm, a firm that has several practices. Some firms had capital markets, for example, have suffered low performance, bankruptcy. But what has been the IP performance? My idea is that IP is somehow recession proof, and it does not have profits that are as high, for example, of capital markets, but it will not have the slumps that these firms would have. I can tell you just about our firm, because 2020 was the landmark, and now all of the CEOs are talking every 2 weeks. Yes, the pandemic has brought miracles. Yes, many of the changes of the profession, I would like to talk about this, are permanent changes. And thirdly, the firm that I think has been the winner follows this trend. In January and February, we had increased rates, and January and February was solid.
I always recommended to increase the fees, but I don't want it to be raised, the fees that I have to pay. Yes, until the day that I have to contract you. Yes. So we January, February, March were high. And then what happens usually in the financial crisis and all the rest of the crisis? Then the corporate would go up and would go down, and in 2020, what saved the cash flow of the firm was the stability of the regulatory practice and IP. Those two groups combined are 30% of our global revenues, and those were maintained in the United States, in Europe, and in Asia. In April, May, and June, there was a dramatic drop of the corporate work, but in the litigation area, in the lawsuits, as the courts closed, and it was not yet possible to have virtual hearings. We suffered a lot. So the corporate area and the litigation area dropped by 2 digits in that brief quarter. But the bankruptcy part went up 25% because we had in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in Europe, in Paris, in London, in Los Angeles, and in New York, we had invested in bankruptcy. So that group, we thought that there was going to be a financial crisis. So that made up for the revenues of the company. In the medical area, there was a lot of work too. We have a very strong life sciences area, and those people in the corporate area never stopped. We are working with one of the 2 companies that are manufacturing the vaccines here in the United States, with a company that have developed the test. So that area remained quite strong. So there was the transactional part stopped, but not fully, because, as you said, capital markets also had an important kickoff. So the market capital was so diversified, and we combined it with the bankruptcy part. And so we worked restructuring in Ecuador, for instance. Ecuador restructured $20 billion of their debt. And today, that country, much because of that restructuring, protected and leveraged their dollarization. And so these are record transactions that no firms could foresee for 2020. But countries like Ecuador or Argentina managed in making the most of this crisis to reduce their interest rates and to reprogram their long-term debts. In the case of Ecuador, they didn't even have a default. They did it very professionally, very wisely. And they postponed the payment of the bonds. Yes, there was a swap. And the International Monetary Fund came with a development fund that was important, but the lawyers' firms, then the courts started to operate, and there were many disputes related with COVID. So COVID led to dispute, contentions, lawsuits, programs for obtaining resources of the various governments, both in Europe and in Asia, and also in the United States. The customers came to us asking for help to structure programs, to have access to all these funds for leverage of global economy. And after COVID, then the parliaments of all the countries started to implement that sort of business. And then the courts opened again. They started in the technology area. We did 2 transactions of $40 billion, among the largest in history. So you have this year, yes, 2020, the 2 chips operations. They're already public, but I have to respect the client. In the technology and the life science areas, we had a record. So if you cut costs and you had an increase in demand starting in June, I think we all saw that movie. You win with that. After restructuring the firm, I think that we positioned ourselves for a future that will be able to cope with a crisis. But 2020 was a record year for diversified firms that acted timely and that were strong to meet the needs of their captive clients. Because Miguel, I think that we started with the sequence. We started speaking of 2020. So obviously the next question is, what do you think 2020 will bring? Think that there will be whiplash. There was a reduction of the labor inventory, and that we will see the consequences in 2021. That would be the first question. Well, by nature, I'm optimistic, but 2021 will be a hard year. It will be hard because we don't know yet what the movie, how the movie will go on. So we'll need austerity measures, at least until June. People in the US don't want to go back to work. In Europe and in Asia, yes. And I see here that before summer 2021, it will be difficult for people to go back to work. Yes, well, this is the worst time of the pandemic, the worst time of the United States. Yes, and then there are expenditures that will increase for 2021. We try to obtain rebates of the providers, but for instance, my the rent in Washington, I postponed much of the rent payment of the rent for 2021, so I'm going to have to pay twice as much in 2021. How much are we going to be able to increase the rates for 2021? Well, we are negotiating with our institutional clients, and those who don't raise their fees this year, they will lag behind. All the firms in Washington, and it took many companies many years to catch up. Now we'll see a race. Now, how much will the market be able to pay? We don't know. So we have that situation. And then there's a lot of investment that wasn't made. I stopped much of the investment, even in technology. I have to work with a global business virtually. So the winners will have a spending scheme for 2021 that will be higher than what we had in 2020. And after that, we'll restructure. Because there are people that say, how did you do all these, how did you cut down costs, some of them permanent, if you had a record year? And I said, well, don't judge me for 2020, because we don't see a nice future in 2021 or 2022. What will 2021 be like? I don't know. I'm always optimistic. I'm always upbeat. Well, there we will see the level of the leaders in the companies. In 2020, we saw their performance, but in 2021, we continue to see how they perform. Now, how do you see the interest in how do you see Latin America at present? Do you think it's a region that has gone up or down? Is it the same? Of course, this was a politically complicated year for Latin America. Well, the pandemic hit hard in Latin America. I think that the two markets that suffered the most, well, the markets that suffered the most economically and for our profession, I think it was the emerging markets, Latin America, Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. In Indonesia, for instance, the invoices have gone down, the turnover has gone down, and Vietnam and in Latin America, not just the political shocks that we had, but also the pandemic was a very hard blow. The economy was stopped, and we didn't succeed in reactivating economy through government programs. The referendum in Chile, well, the pandemic, well, in the United States, the appetite for investment in Latin America has stopped. This change in administration, now the Americans are going to produce, to manufacture here as Trump wanted, and to export, or are they going to think of maquilas in Latin America? We don't know. We don't know for how long there haven't been maquilas. And when was the last time that they opened factories in our countries? And then what hit us in Latin America was the closure of airports, tourism, It's an industry that is absolutely hit. For Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, so many countries, that was a very hard blow. So in Latin America, we were always skillful to recover, but the pandemic was very hard because there have been sectors such as technology, health sciences that had a boom. All of this, well, the Western coast, we had record years, but in Latin America, oil is not recovering its prices. Tourism has been hit too. So I see that we'll have hard years in the future before we recover. So you know the market in Latin America. If you were practicing in Latin America now, if you had a medium-sized space or a small, medium, and large space, what would you do to prepare yourself for that? I would say, well, we've been able to survive a crisis in Latin America, and so I'm getting ready to keep that possibility to maintain as much as possible in the market. This is not necessarily the time to raise fees. Why not? How can we speak of raising fees with such a depression? It's very difficult to generalize. Brazil is a different world where there's still a lot of activity. But Ricardo, this was a hard year. I think that medium and small-sized companies will have competitive advantages trying to maintain a more manageable expenditure scheme. So, well, I think that how do you see the legal market in Latin America? Well, I wanted to complement the previous question. We don't know what will happen with the global economy. There's a contradiction there. You see the stock exchange, 30,000 points of the Dow Jones, and you say, wow, global economy. If we were to judge by the stock exchange, we are doing wonderful. But it's all been very artificial. A lot of money was created because of the incentive programs, the promotion programs by the governments. Now, if we continue to see an economic growth in the mature markets, I think that Latin America won't do so badly because the people are going to resume travels and tourism, and the exports products will be exported again, such as flour, shrimp, cocoa, oil. All that will be sold more, and hopefully then that will be more favorable for Latin America. So we wouldn't do so badly, but the great uncertainty is what will be the situation like in the mature markets, because they generate the exports of services to Latin America. Today, we are producing quite little in Latin America. Yes, indeed. And do you see any markets that you think that will react faster, or any regions that you see better positioned in the crisis? Well, probably yes, because there are regions that have suffered more than others. Well, it's difficult. It's difficult to speculate because you would say, well, I would think that the large countries are going to recover faster. But then if you add the political aspect, then the answer may differ. There's a great uncertainty, both to the right in Brazil or the left in Argentina. So in our countries, government is an actor in the national economy. There you have in Ecuador two options, right or left, or Peru changing the president constantly, which was not seen in the past. You have results of the process in Venezuela and Bolivia. Also uncertainty in Colombia. So where the region is heading, it depends on how they shuffle things politically. And Miguel, there's a lot of debate, especially I see this with IP firms that say, well, maybe some may be interested in starting working, for instance, with prosecution, that are services that are highly regulated. How do you see things for a company to expand or to grow, for instance, because it's easier said than done. Well, Ricardo, to you and I, when you worked in the firm, it's very difficult for IP practice to generate premium work because the service buyer is different in the company. Maybe in the litigation area, you start seeing, especially when we speak of patents and very important assets of the company, we see an identity between the service buyer and the typical IP internal lawyer that buys the boutique services. I think that, for instance, Baker McKenzie has been very successful in creating a global IP practice and trying to connect the two. Somehow we also managed to do that in Europe, not so much in the US. It is possible that an IP boutique may see the possibility of joining a firm that has corporate and litigation so that their customers may start using those services and generate more resources. Well, I don't know. Sometimes it's not the same buyer. You are an expert. You are precisely an example, a role model for a very successful person living exclusively of IP in Washington. Yes, I think that you need to be flexible always. Very often, your practice depends on your client's needs. What I have seen is that some clients have needed more services in the regulatory area. In my firm, I have a general platform, so I don't have that challenge. I think that, well, if you don't, you need a sector in your company that puts money on the table. You may have a client that requests some services. Well, in the United States, you need to have a practice. If you are in IP, I think, well, that you depend on maybe you have a client that came to you because of trademarks or a labor issue, and then later on has an acquisition, so you start offering different services in your firm.
If you're a specialist in IP and you're in a general conference, and somehow I tell you IP practice services in general or specific services, that would make no sense. So the challenge would be more, I would say the greater challenge would be as a boutique firm, because I will have to be more selective. So maybe I should try to find more regulated clients, or clients that I could sell more regulatory services to, because I'm not going to have bankruptcy. I'm not going to go into bankruptcy in that case. I don't know if you understand, because they have more regulatory questions. It depends where you are, what you do. I fully agree with you. One strategy that has worked for cooperation, that this is what you're mentioning, is the specialization in sectors. So besides having litigation, regulatory IP, and transactions, we have managed to have litigation, transactional, and IP regulatory lawyers to work together and in sectors. So we have the health sector, energy sector, reporting sector, technology, transportation, telecommunications, so automobiles. That, yes, could generate synergies. So if I am a boutique firm specialized in providing services to the chemical industry, and I can somehow join those who know about licensing, because today that has a significant role in Latin America. So I can regulate administratively those firms. So, and I also have the litigation professionals, and I have this boutique firm for the pharmaceutical company that could work very well, or to have this group in a big company, and in a smaller group to have restructuring, training, exports, corporate work, but also the claims to the dealers. So that is to offer a comprehensive service, either to the vehicle assembly companies, or to other companies. In technology, that proved very successful to us. Google is one of our main clients, and if you see Google turnover, you see that that includes professionals in litigation, in corporate M&A, in transactions. The strategy would be to tackle the market by sectors, and that the and to target the buyer that has the different sectors. I would like to ask you if you see more specialization or generalization in the future. I think that you already answered yes, specialization, of course. The time of generalists is probably not suitable anymore for some types of industries, and you see that in Latin American firms. When I started 30 years ago, the senior partner was a kind of local leader that spoke English and kept everything secret. There was no succession planning, and we were the young guys, and we received work, and it was isolated. We worked on different things every day, on a pharmaceutical company, on a mine, on different projects. If you see, the Latin American firms today are much stronger than when we used to work there 30 years ago. Yes, I think that the family component at that time for family business was much stronger, and that has changed. Yes, we're talking about young lawyers that were trained outside their countries, that speak English very well without the accent we have, that are highly specialized in different areas, and they are willing to be better every day, highly professional. So, and I think that that has led to the fact that in our countries the service quality is much higher than that of 30 years ago. We Latin American firms have gained the respect of international clients, And fortunately, in terms of compliance and corruption, the companies are well prepared to deal with the needs in the area. And because these new generations have been trained abroad, we have not fallen into the temptation of getting into this strategy or accepting these strategies. So we offer clients services provided by very well trained professionals trained abroad that are working sometimes outside their jurisdiction. Many times we receive referrals from Latin American companies because we have the culture of not underestimating those who gave us the work, but to work jointly with those that provided referrals to us. So we work as a team with those lawyers. And what we're seeing now is that the Latin American firms are achieving significant results exporting services and representing conglomerates in their country that have decided to diversify. For example, the operations that we carried out for Equatorian banks that have allocated their portfolios and restructured their revenues with credit cards and in Panama and monetization services in outside of Panama. But before that, the lawyer would just tell you to take care of this. Right now, we are working jointly in this as a team, and we see how the maturity of local firms has made this relevant. We have companies working in different Latin American countries. So, yes, clearly, companies have diversified. Of course, there are always sad exceptions. For example, those Cuban intervened law firms and the situation in Venezuela that has been less optimistic in terms of the future of the profession, at least in short terms. It was very hard for me to close the Venezuelan operation. We didn't close that for economic reasons because it was highly successful. We exported. We closed it because of the international sanctions that we were receiving, but it was very painful to me. Yeah, both were very close to your heart, and you know this. I haven't received a call from anyone asking to invest in Cuba since Carnival company explored the market at that time. And with Venezuela, we have not had an acquisition or any kind of takeover in Venezuela for a long time. Yes. Mm-hmm. Lately in Venezuela, we did not do much business. It's a market that is close to my heart, and it's very sad. But I think that we have learned that nothing lasts forever. That we have learned that we have to be patient. That things change. We ended up in places that we never thought of. Remember when we met, and I was a law student, and if you had told me then that we would both end up working in the United States, I wouldn't have believed it. I think we need to be patient and work together, and opportunities will probably come. I'm not I'm keeping my faith. I know that things will improve. Yes, and we need to be brave so as to make the decisions on time. I thought I was going to retire as a lawyer and keeping my father's portfolio of clients and teaching at the university in my own country, but yes, I just wanted to finally ask you to leave the final reflections about the market and the business. You said that you said that there are some changes that are going to remain in the markets. Yes, yes, changes in the profession. Yes, I agree. The firm will change. For example, in terms of traveling, we will have less trips. If the economic justification for the trips is not there, we will travel a lot less. In Latin America, will be more flexible because we like to meet more often, but you will see less business trips for sure. The physical space, we are aiming at having smaller offices. I think that because so many people want to work from home, I think that we could start to adopt a time sharing scheme where offices are shared. In my case, I spent too much time in other places, so it didn't make sense for me to have a big office in Miami. So the idea is to reduce office space, to have flexible work from home. But and we need to, of course, keep the feedback, keep the culture of feedback, so that we could integrate work. Creativity happens when we work in the same conference room, so we will schedule our physical resources better. In terms of support staff, the big companies will maximize the use of global business service centers. We have one in Louisville, one in Johannesburg in South Africa, and another one in Birmingham, outside of London. So the service staff will grow, and we will no longer have a secretary outside. We will share the secretaries, we'll share the resources, we'll have less staff everywhere, and less staff in the offices, of course, and the staff that we have will be relocated, or they will work from home at a lower cost. And the technology will be the big issue. Those companies that invest on technology, not only in communication but on service providing, will thrive, will create apps for clients, will have project management applications for prices, will have pricing professionals that with AI will analyze how much we have spent before and how we can forecast prices for the future. We will all feel more comfortable because we will be having scientific information on what we have done. If you ask me about the future, you know that I will speak more than I should. Thank you very much, Miguel. Best greetings to you. Bye bye.